5 years. That's how long I've lived in Portugal, and I still don't speak Portuguese. Not really. Not the way people assume you would after half a decade somewhere. If you're picturing me ordering coffee in fluent Portuguese and chatting with my neighbors like an old pro, that's not the reality, and I think the reality is more useful to you than the fantasy. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why this happens, what actually gets in the way after 50, and what I'm doing differently this time around. If you appreciate me making this type of content, let me know by gently tapping that like button. Let's get into it. When I first moved here, I told myself I'd pick up the language naturally, just by being immersed in it. That's what everyone tells you happens when you move abroad. You hear it in cafes, you see it on menus, you absorb it without trying. Honestly, that's mostly a myth. At least it was for me. In Porto, especially in the neighborhoods where a lot of expats end up, you can go weeks running errands, ordering food, and having small everyday interactions almost entirely in English. People here are genuinely kind about switching to English the moment they hear your accent, and that kindness, as much as I appreciated it, quietly let me off the hook for longer than I'd like to admit. Let me be specific about what not speaking Portuguese actually looks like, because it's not what people picture. I can order food, I can handle small talk about the weather, I can read most of a menu, but the moment a conversation moves past the basics, say a pharmacist explaining dosage instructions, or a neighbor telling me about a change to the building's water schedule, I'm lost, and I have to ask them to slow down or switch to English. I remember setting up a doctor's appointment, and I misunderstood the time and arrived later than I was supposed to. That gap between tourist-level Portuguese and actually functional Portuguese is enormous, and 5 years in, I'm still standing in it. My first real attempt at closing that gap came about a year and a half in. I signed up for an evening PLA course at a local school in central Portugal, 3 nights a week. It started strong. I liked the structure. I liked having somewhere to be and homework to actually do. But evening classes, while working remotely Monday through Friday for an American company on an Eastern time zone, got pretty rough. Life abroad has a way of filling up fast. Doctor's appointments, paperwork, visits from friends and family, day trips I didn't want to miss. Within a few months, I was skipping more classes than I attended, and eventually I just quietly stopped going altogether. I don't think that's a personal failing. I think that's what happens when you build a plan that doesn't account for how tired you actually are most evenings. The second attempt was quieter, and honestly lonelier. I tried to teach myself, using the Linguno app, the kind of self-paced study that sounds great in theory. And it does work for some people. It didn't work for me, because there was no one checking in, no class waiting for me, no sense that anyone would notice if I quietly stopped. I'd do a few lessons, feel good about it, then life would get busy, and 3 weeks would go by without opening the app once. Self-study, without any accountability, is easy to abandon quietly, and that's exactly what I did, twice. Quick break if any of this sounds familiar, or if you want more on what everyday life here actually looks like, past the vacation version, check the description and the pinned comment below for more resources. Alright, back to it. Here's what I think nobody tells you about learning a language after 50, at least not honestly. It's not that your brain suddenly can't do it anymore. It's that everything competing for your attention is louder than it was when you were 20. When you're younger, you often have fewer responsibilities pulling at you, more free evenings, more tolerance for feeling embarrassed in front of strangers. At my age, I've built a life with routines already in place, and inserting something new and genuinely difficult into that life takes real, deliberate effort every single week, not just motivation on day one. There's also the ego piece, and I want to be honest about this because pretending otherwise wouldn't be fair to you. I've spent decades being competent at things, running a household, managing a career, handling whatever life threw at me without much trouble. Sitting in a classroom, struggling to conjugate a verb a 12-year-old could manage, brings up a specific kind of discomfort. It's humbling in a way that genuinely surprised me, and I think that discomfort is part of why so many people my age quietly avoid language classes altogether, even when they know they should be taking them. I also think there's a quieter fear underneath the embarrassment, the fear that maybe this is just harder now, permanently, and that no amount of effort will get you to where a 20-year-old could get in half the time. I don't think that fear is entirely wrong. Learning does take longer for most of us at this age, but I think it gets used as an excuse to quit before really testing it. The 2 times I gave up, I wasn't actually testing whether I could learn the language. I was testing whether I could stay motivated without a real reason to keep going. And the answer, both times, was no. What actually changed for me wasn't motivation, it was a deadline. To apply for permanent residency here, you need to demonstrate a 2-level Portuguese, and that requirement is exactly what got me back into a classroom for the 3rd time. I'm now taking weekend online conversation classes, as well as in-person classes, and the format matters more than I expected it would. It's not a big lecture-style class. It's smaller, conversational, focused on participation, and not so many grammar tables. And because it falls in the mornings during the week, it doesn't compete with the tired end of a weekday the way my first attempt always did. Here's what a typical session actually looks like. There are usually 20 other students, most of them around my age or younger, most of them also working towards some kind of residency deadline, which turns out to matter more than I expected. When everyone in the room has a real reason to be there, nobody's coasting, and nobody's precious about making mistakes out loud. We spend most of the 3 hours working through everyday situations, learning daily routines, oral practice, and of course drilling verb charts, but in a more organized format. I still do homework between sessions, usually 20 to 30 minutes a few times a week, small enough that it doesn't feel like a second job the way the evening class eventually did. The other thing that's different this time is that I finally have people to practice with outside of class. A couple of classmates and I check in during the week, sometimes just a short voice message back and forth in Portuguese about nothing important. It's low stakes, it's a little embarrassing, and it's genuinely helping more than any app ever did, because someone is actually expecting a reply. I won't pretend this 3rd attempt has been easy, or that I'm anywhere close to fluent, because I'm not, but it's sticking in a way the first 2 didn't, and I think that's because the structure finally matches my actual life, instead of some idealized version of it I kept trying to force myself into. If you're thinking about learning a language later in life, past 50, past 60, whenever you happen to be starting, my honest advice is to stop looking for motivation, and instead, look for a format that fits the life you actually have, not the life you wish you had more energy for. Concretely, that means a few things I wish someone had told me 5 years ago. Pick a time that doesn't compete with something you're already too tired for. Early mornings and weekends worked for me, precisely because evenings never did. Find a reason bigger than I should. A deadline, a goal, something with real stakes attached, because vague self-improvement rarely survives a busy week. And find at least one other person going through it with you, even if it's just occasional messages back and forth, because accountability from a real person beats accountability from an app every time. None of that guarantees fluency, but it's the difference between an attempt that quietly fades out in month 3 and one that's still going 5 years later, even if slowly. If you're weighing whether to move somewhere without speaking the language first, or you're already living somewhere and quietly avoiding this exact problem, I want you to know it's far more common than anyone admits out loud. 5 years in, still working on it, still showing up most weekdays, and that's honestly the most realistic promise I can make about any of this. And if you want to go deeper on what daily life here actually costs and looks like day to day, I made a video on exactly that. You can check it out by clicking right here. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.